Hello guys, so we are now in Dubai at WOW Summit, and here with you Anna Tutova, co-founder of Cointelegram, and our guest Yat Siu, who is co-founder of Animoca Brands, the most active Metaverse and NFT investor and VC fund. Great to have you here, Yat.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and talking about the land and Metaverse, Animoca has been quite an avid and active investor in Metaverse. So can you explain what is Metaverse for you? And as for NFTs, now we see the market is flat. We see multiple articles that NFTs are dead and so on. So what's the current state of Metaverse market?
Well, okay. So I think, first of all, if you think about the first quarter of this year, NFT sales was still close to $4.7 billion. So at the end of the day, yes, it's lower than it was last year, but I would say it's anything but dead. The entire sort of what we describe as the open metaverse is $1 trillion space. The economic activity is that of small countries. You know, if you think of, for instance, what's happening in DeFi at roughly $100 billion of sort of monthly sort of volume of trades, for instance, you know, we think of the space as lower than last year, but actually growing quite healthily. And I think the metric, very similar to sort of when you think about .com back in sort of 2000, 2001 when .com bust happened. Yes, the share prices were down, the company valuations were down. However, the activity, people using email, using sort of, in this case for Web3, on-chain transaction actually is on the increase. So the amount of people that are basically, if you look at Dapper Labs, for instance, the activity, most of them being Web3 games, is actually higher than ever before. And it's distributed. So before, really, you only had 1 or 2 titles that were the dominant players, and now you have many of them out there. So as a result, I think the market's become healthier, and there's more wallet activations, there's more smart contracts coming out. So I think valuation, really, I would say that when you think of the token prices, which you're referring to, or the NFT prices, that to me is more a reflection of the market moving ahead of itself. You know, in Web3, capitalism is embedded. That means you have both the boom and busts of these market cycles. But that doesn't mean that the underlying principle of digital ownership isn't important. It is very important, and more people are joining the space.
And as well, education is a significant market, and as well, you highlighted it many times, and particularly with your investment into TinyTap. So how do you see the significance and intersection of Web3 technologies, crypto, and education sector?
So we think education in Web3 is absolutely critical, because when we think about blockchain and sort of Web3 industries, like the open metaverse broadly is like building of nations, and what makes a successful nation is education. So it's not just educating yourself about Web3, it's just broadly that you can sort of gain value through education. So for instance, the teachers are actually content creators. They make content. Now basically selling them as NFTs, they actually can make more income than they made as a teacher. They can also teach people about Web3 as well. They can understand about the world of crypto. If they understand about the world of crypto because they earn basically sort of, I guess, a crypto income in the open metaverse, they are going to be the ones that will also basically essentially educate children and other sort of people around that space as well. So we think that's important. The other thing, of course, is that education is from a mission standpoint, is much more easily understood by people who are not in our space. You know, when we focus on around DeFi, which is very financial in nature, or we focus around gaming, which has certain connotations, it's very hard sometimes to convince people to say, what's the benefit of Web3? But when teachers make more money in Web3, when people actually become more financially literate, when they understand more about the value of money and they become better educated in space, that's hard to argue against. So I think it's also very, very important from a political perspective for people to understand why sort of Web3 is important. And finally, education is a $5 trillion space, right? We focus on gaming, which is over $200 billion as an industry. That's big. But education at $5 trillion is even bigger. Think about everything we do in Web2 today. Even the biggest media platforms like YouTube is actually probably the biggest educational channel.
And what do you think about the concept learn to earn? And we see as well play to earn, but many people say that it's not sustainable. What are your thoughts about learn to earn? And
well, first of all,
it's a good model?
Anytime you have digital ownership or any kind of ownership, the element of ownership and earning is a component of that ownership. So for instance, if you buy a real estate in any country in the world, you have the potential to earn, but doesn't mean you actually have to earn from it. You can live in it, or you can just use it as a holiday home, or you can have it for different reasons, or you can have family, friends use it. It could be for social reasons, right? And that's basically the same with NFTs. If I happen to own virtual land in Sandbox, I could earn money from it. I could rent it out. I could create events, but I don't have to. It could just be a cool hangout place. It could be something for reputation. It could be something that I'm building basically just to make sure that I have a certain community that I want to maintain. And so to me, that's the cultural aspect of it. So what's been missing in the past is the depth of culture in Web3 is evolving, and the financial aspect has been accelerated. And so as a result of that, we've been, I think, too focused on the pure financial assets and aspects of it, when in fact, actually, most of the human activity isn't financial in nature, it's cultural in nature. And so I think, again, when you think about the value of land, when you think about the value of our digital assets, focusing on culture, I think, is much more relevant than focusing on money, which is a means to the cultural end.
And in July, you were appointed to Hong Kong Web3 task force on Web3 development. So can you tell more about this role and what do you help to achieve with it?
Well, the Web3 task force's goal is to basically help promote and grow the Web3 ecosystem in Hong Kong. And what's exciting is that it's made partially by government officials and also partially by industry professionals like myself. And that's actually quite unique because it's not just the government making policy, the government is making policy and getting recommendations and suggestions in tandem together with community leaders in Hong Kong, which is great. It also demonstrates that Hong Kong is very serious about Web3. And you can see already some of its rules. They are allowing for certain kind of crypto retail trading today, for instance. They've given out their first licenses for exchange licenses for companies like OSL and Hashkey, for instance. So many things that have basically happening in Hong Kong and Web3. And of course, I think the most exciting thing isn't that it's just about Hong Kong. Hong Kong probably wouldn't do any of this if it didn't get permission from China. And so I think this actually, I think it should be looked at from the lens of what is China's approach to basically Web3. And they've put out a white paper as well in Beijing describing how Web3 is the future of the internet and critically important. So from that angle, I would say, you know, it's tactical, it's strategic, and it's important.
So for you, it's Hong Kong is like gateway for China to get into crypto and in Web3?
So if you think about Hong Kong historically, it's always been the financial gateway and the international gateway in and out of China. Right? For instance, in China, you can't actually do many of the financial services and transactions that you could do in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has always been that free market. And so we think the exact same thing will happen in relation to Web3 digital assets and also crypto. Meaning that there are things you can do in Hong Kong as maybe, you know, from China or into China or in sort of from China that you couldn't actually do within sort of the mainland. So we think that's going to be a similar kind of mechanism, and that's evolving, and that's something that people are sort of studying and looking at. But to us, that would seem like a logical step.
And you are now in the UAE, and UAE is as well quite active and supportive to different crypto companies, as well Metaverse developments. So how do you see the differences between Hong Kong and Middle East crypto environment, crypto regulations, and what do governments can learn from each other to take any advantages from each other? So
first, I think Hong Kong currently has a classic second mover advantage in the sense that they've came a little later to the party. But they're learning, obviously, what's happening in Singapore, in UAE, in Europe, and you know all the issues that are happening in the world. So they're learning from that. But I would also say that you know clearly VARA and sort of UAE is not sort of doing nothing. They're continuing to evolve in that space. My view is that actually it's healthy and good competition, meaning that you know in some ways I would argue that Dubai has almost become, for a short period of time, almost the exclusive place to go if you wanted to do stuff in crypto because the rules weren't clear. There was a little bit of Singapore, but it was difficult for people to open bank accounts and so on. But Hong Kong basically has come on very, very sort of strong in this one. And I think that's actually really important because it's not only important for Hong Kong versus Dubai. In fact, I think they coexist and they help each other. It's actually good for, it's healthy competition. It's also choices. If you're a crypto entrepreneur, you want to know where to go. And if you only have a few choices, it's not good. But if you can actually maybe go to Japan or go to Hong Kong or go to Singapore or go to Dubai, for instance, I think that's very healthy. And it also means that you have more government and forces and regulators studying the space, right? I think that's what's missing. Like right now, because there's so few of them in the past that have been trying to analyze and understand the space, the common understanding wasn't there. But as more and more governments and countries realize how important Web3 is, and they're basically sort of putting their efforts into it, this will help influence other markets to say, oh, well, if Hong Kong is now looking at it, maybe we should look at it as well.
And in terms of innovations, which regions do you see the most active, where most of your portfolio companies are based?
Well, I mean, I think we're quite international. We have a very diverse portfolio. But in the last 6 to 12 months, definitely Asia has been very much on the rise. And that's partially because of the government policies and also new founders that have emerged from the space. And this is, you know, obviously in the Greater China region, in Japan, in Korea, in Southeast Asia. But of course, many of our portfolio companies have actually also moved to Dubai and the MENA region as well. So definitely between those two areas, you can see a lot of activity.
And now AI is quite hot topic, and you have been investing into AI since 2018. Do you see any intersection of blockchain and AI, and how these technologies can impact other industries?
We actually think AI and Web3 are made for each other. And yes, we have made quite a few investments in AI back in 2018 and 2019, part of our accelerator, and continue to do so. I think the two areas that we're particularly excited about AI is one is around digital provenance is the first one, meaning that when you have generative AI, how do you protect your digital property rights? And one way to protect your digital property rights is essentially to use blockchain because you know the provenance. And in that sense, actually, the digital provenance can move at the pace of technology. Because when someone basically, let's say, uses your image to create another image, how do you know that? And again, blockchain can solve that. The second one that we're excited about is sort of NPCs, non-player characters inside games. It's probably the one form of AI that most gamers, if most people in the world probably engage. There's over 3 billion people who play games, and they all engage with an NPC. But that NPC today is pretty dumb. With large language models, they can actually start to interact and do stuff. They'll start doing real transactions with you. What are they going to transact with? They're going to transact in crypto. More importantly, though, we think that these sort of NPCs are going to become autonomous agents in other ecosystems, in other metaverses. That means they'll be able to travel around from one metaverse to the other and become interoperable, much like how we see the vision of NFTs. That means you have AI agents talking to other AI agents, and they're going to transact in crypto as well, and other forms of digital asset. So to us, sort of Web3 and AI is actually going to supercharge Web3 and really drive it forward.
And can you share as well the most recent investments you made you're excited about?
Well, I mean, every time this question is asked, it's almost like having to pick our favorite children, which is something that, we don't typically do. But look, I think, again, one of the things we often talk about is, education. Sort of, I think TinyTap is one that we're super excited about. But I think the one project that we're very focused on at the moment is the Mochaverse. Mochaverse is basically sort of our system in which we integrate basically all of the Animoca network effects that we have together into one. We have a digital sort of identity that's basically pushed out as a soul-bound token, for instance, to create a way in which you can create a truly decentralized digital identity layer for people to basically build on top of. And of course, with that, to gain access and benefit from the 450 portfolio companies and the ecosystem that Animoca has built, so that we can then create a broader shared network effect from that. So the Mochaverse basically is also a way in which we then help give governance. So if you own Mochaverse NFTs, you actually have a way in which you can vote into our token reserves. For instance, things like our holdings in ApeCoin, or our holdings in EDU, or our holdings in Astrofer, or REVV. You'd be able to actually have a say in it. So it becomes almost like a political system as well. So that's actually one area that we're quite excited about, because we do think that DAOs are the future of organizations, and this would be the next step in sort of helping evolve that.
And this Mocha ID, can it be used for now only within Animoca Brands ecosystem, or can it be used in other games?
Yeah, so you can use the Mocha ID when it's fully deployed into any ecosystem out there. And you can imagine what that does, whether you do KYC or not, whether you basically do sort of reputation building. This is the kind of ID that someone can build on top of. And we have probably one of the largest addressable Web3 and Web2 audiences in our markets that can basically help sort of develop that.
And do you play yourself Web3 and Web2 games?
So I don't play as many Web2 games as I used to, only because I don't have as much time, but I do play our Web3 games. I play Rec League, Phantom Galaxies are basically the two games that I'm currently playing. I do casually play with GAMEE and of course Sandbox.
Nice. And can you share as well, how can we bridge the gap between traditional entertainment, gaming, and Web3?
So I think, very similar to my earlier point, the way to bridge this gap is education. The resistance for the Web2 gamers who don't like Web3 is not a content resistance. But there's some people who sort of just look for a fun game, no problem. These are easier. But there's a bunch of people that are resistant to the idea of crypto. They think it's bad because they are against this kind of digital capitalism. They think introducing sort of financial systems inside gaming will pervert the course of the game. But what they don't realize is that the game is already heavily financified. Just the company that's making money is a studio. You just don't have any idea. You can't participate in that. We think actually that's obviously a worse outcome. But they don't understand that. So part of our mission is to explain them why actually Web3 gaming matters. In the early days of the internet, when someone was going online and reading an online magazine, they're like, why should I do that? I'd much rather open the pages, the color is nicer, I can feel and touch it, right? So who needs online, right? And in 2000, 2001, people were saying the internet is dead, nobody's going to use it, because, reading something online was just not as fun as reading something physical online. But there were clear benefits of reading online, and eventually that's all we do today, right? And Web3 is the same, but the paradigm, in both cases, the paradigm was a meta paradigm. It wasn't a sort of something that was hard and physical. And so the meta paradigm is around the benefits of ownership and the benefits of basically what ownership gives you, which includes financial value, but goes to your culture, your digital identity, your sort of digital meaning. And that's something that we have to basically explain more. And I think as we evolve over time, as more people talk about it, it becomes accepted. Like today, for instance, I remember a lot of people in the early days were refusing to go on social media. I will never go on Facebook. I will never go on Instagram. But they have to. And now they're on Instagram and they're following all these rules. And again, it's the same kind of effect, we think.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you for the great interview.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.